Heavy Kev here today with some remedial education. So I offered a challenge. It's called my Antifa Idiot Challenge, and I've had a few people accept the challenge. Now, this challenge is if you're to the left of Ronald Reagan and you can name three policies, just three policies that are of the left, are of Democrats, that you think will help the world or help Americans, and if I cannot make a poignant rebuttal in a video, then I will concede and I will go join you with a Che Guevara t-shirt at your next Antifa rally. So far, obviously I'm not worried about losing this challenge, and so far nobody's been able to even offer a single good argument from the left that would, you know, help America or the world. But that is said, I've had people try, and one of those challengers was Jack the Ripper. That's his moniker in the comments section. And so I wiped the floor with him, and then he came back and he started listing all these other points. And so, you know, I only require three, but since he's an overachiever, I'll address all of them. Now, some of these were replies to other people, and I cut out some of that filler, but I'll break down his 5 points here, and I'll destroy him again. So 1, he wants to replace the fiat currency with worker vouchers. Credit and debt are the results of profits drying up. Vouchers will only represent hours worked. So yes, all right, fiat currency is a problem. The Federal Reserve is the cause of that problem, and central banking is a tenet of Marxism. So you're arguing against your own system here. But that aside, credit and debt are not the results of profits drying up. Credit and debt are the results of people spending more than they make, and usually the dangerous credit and debt, because, you know, household debt is a problem in America, and that problem is caused because our banking system allows people to overextend themselves. But even if you shut that down, the biggest problem is government debt. Trying to pay for all these stupid programs you think you are owed because you're entitled little brat, and that government cannot afford to pay for those. I've already talked about healthcare spending and how, you know, the average cost per person via the federal government is $7,000 a person in America. That's craziness, okay? And government waste is at an all-time high. We have $20 trillion in debt right now. That's dangerous. And do you know how we get rid of that debt? By cutting all these social programs that are being abused, that are overextending our government, and going back to a system where we have a balanced budget. Vouchers will only represent hours worked. Okay, Hans Hermann Hoppe addressed this in a great way in his book, Democracy, the God That Failed. He talked about how all money is representative of your labor, so, or an exchange of services. So, yes, you know, fiat currency is bad because they're pumping money in and inflating that money. But here's the thing. If you went back to bullion, you'd still have people who have more skills, who provide better services, and they would collect more bullion, and then they become wealthy, and your whole system would just turn right back into what we have now, which is a hierarchical system, and people would accumulate wealth, and dumb people would go out and get themselves into trouble by spending all the money they make. This is why lottery winners all end up broke at the end, or the majority of them. Revolution, that's his second policy, I guess. He said revolution. That's all he said in this response. But you know, that's retarded, man. Look, revolution against who? You're gonna overthrow the government, and then what? Then we fight each other over who controls that government? You know what? We have more guns, more money, we own the land, and we have the moral high ground. And on top of that, you know, look at yourself. Look at the people who support communism. Look what they've done to the world. Do you really want to implement that system? Do you want to destroy all the benefits of Western culture, of capitalism, that I'm sure have benefited you greatly over your life just because you didn't make as much money as somebody else? That's your problem? That's why you want revolution? You know, that's ridiculous. Your iPhone would disappear. You would have nothing without capitalism. Number 3, shut down the police state and dismantle all nuclear weapons. Well, I can agree with the police state. You know, the police state is another problem because of a large, aggressive federal government. And you know what? I like law and order. Trump was elected as sort of a law and order president because we've seen that it's not the police causing criminality, it's criminality causing the need for more police. So yeah, let's get rid of the police state. Let's start by, pushing all the criminals and lowlifes into a prison colony somewhere. That way we can live peacefully. How about that? Since we're talking about things that'll never happen, here we go. So dismantle all nuclear weapons. What is this, Superman 2? Are you going to go fly around the world picking up all the nuclear weapons and throwing them into space? The reason we have nuclear weapons and we haven't ended proliferation of nuclear weapons is because states like North Korea, usually communist states like China and North Korea, or Islamo-fascist states like those in Iran and Pakistan, have nuclear weapons. And they're not going to stop trying to get nuclear weapons. So this is a pipe dream, man. What are you smoking? Overthrow the ruling elite. Well, dude, the ruling elite, I can agree that there's a bunch of assholes that try to control how we live and our way of life. And, people with a lot of money who have generational wealth, they do tend to try to influence politics and culture. And that's a problem to me. But you know what? If you overthrow them, there's always going to be a ruling elite. We're a hierarchical society. Carl Jung wrote all about this in his psychology books. We always will have somebody, like I said, even if you got rid of currency and did vouchers, people would accumulate those vouchers, or people would use some other form of capital. But the ruling elite are the ones pushing communism in the first place. Your whole ideology is backed by these billionaires like George Soros. If you look at the donors to the Democrat Party, it's like a who's who's list of billionaire elites. And then on top of that, you have unions and powerful organizations like that try to control everything. You have people like George Soros who are funding groups like Antifa, BLM. They're pushing this. And you know what? They've pushed all these communist movements throughout history. In fact, going all the way back to when Lenin returned to Russia, he was backed by the British royal families because they wanted to destroy competition, and they used communism to just destroy the soul of Russia, crush its economy, crush the culture. And it worked, and they made Russia into a slave state. And, it sort of backfired on them because Russia became very aggressive, and it caused the Cold War. But that did bolster their military arms sales, so, you could argue that if you want to delve into conspiracy. But the truth is, like I said, the elites have pushed communism worldwide. I mean, look at the corporations that are pushing all this cultural Marxism. Look at the mainstream media reporting on Trump, 87% negative reporting on Trump. And they do that to most Republicans. You've seen, constant attacks on whites, on white males, Christians, through cultural Marxism. It doesn't stop. It's always been the elites pushing this. Number 4, end class segregation by implementing democratic organization and direct democracy. So, class segregation. This is a big one, guys. So endogamy is self-segregation. This is something that happens all over the world, has happened throughout history. And the Medical Daily Journal wrote a big piece on this. They talked about how they did a study and showed how people segregate by race, but not only by race. If you take away race, they segregate by age, education, looks. This is something I noticed when I was living in a communist commune. I lived with a group called the Rainbow Family. They're a communal living group that travels around the world. And I noticed that all they did was replace money with sexual capital. They replaced financial capital with sexual capital, with drugs. They used drugs as capital. They used the black market system there. And, this is what happens. And they segregated. The people who had more drugs were the rulers of the group. They were the leaders of that group. And the people who had better looks. I mean, that's a huge one. In this study, was people segregated by looks. So if you're an ugly, dumb, blue-haired bimbo feminist, you're still not going to be on top of things when the revolution comes. You're going to still be at the bottom of the barrel. Anyway, this is something, direct democracy on top of that. Even if you could somehow get rid of all class structures. Like I said, we're still hierarchical animals. Humans are primates. We have a very complex social order, and that order is built into our DNA. That's not going to change. And putting direct democracy in place in a country with 320 million will only ensure that the bottom of the barrel the most uneducated, those people who are at the bottom of the barrel, have just as much control or more in our decision making, and that's never good. Like I said, democracy is two wolves and a sheep voting on what's for dinner. Number 5, expropriate the means of production. For democracy in the workplace, take the wealth from the top 1%, throw the elite into exile, use their wealth to rebuild healthcare and the education system. All right, well, that's a doozy. So, you want to take all the money from the elite and throw it into health and education systems. So already, we're sinking tons of money into our education system. If you look at private schools and compare them to public schools get way less money per child than the public sector or public education does. They get way less funding from organizations, including the federal government, and state schools are supported mostly by the most local tax money. So that tax money on the local level is what's going into state schools. Now, the federal government gives money to private and public schools, but they give much more to public schools. And here's the thing. If you look at the money spent on public education, it makes a dwarf out of the money spent on private education in this country. And that is because it is a sinking ship. We have teachers' unions that protect bad teachers. We have bad characters in those schools, people from bad cultures, from bad families, and those people contribute to the failure of even the brightest and best students. The whole idea of the school voucher system is that a zip code should not influence how well your opportunities are, how you make it in the world. And that's a good system. And the left is trying to shut down the voucher system for schools. But that said, same thing with healthcare. Healthcare is a sinking ship. We're throwing trillions of dollars into healthcare, and it's failing. And the fact is that we have an unhealthy, uneducated population that costs us way more than what we can afford to pay via our taxes. So our government goes into debt spending money on that population. And the same thing's true with schools. You can throw all the money in the world into the public schools, but the fact is the bureaucracy that is government is failing those schools because it's not run as efficiently and discipline's not as enforced as well as in the private sector. And I can tell you, as somebody who went to both private and public schools, it's a world of difference. And the money my parents spent to send me to private schools was much less than the tax burden per their bracket of income that would go to public schools. Anyway, total wealth in this country is $44 trillion. Okay, 34% of that wealth is held by the top 1%. So that's about $30 trillion. So if you kick out all the elites, you take all their money away and throw them into exile, like you said. Well, first, if you throw them into exile, they'll just come back because they have stashes of gold and money all over the world. Secondly, though, if you took away all their wealth somehow and managed to find all those stashes of gold and money, it's only $30 trillion. That's not gonna support anything. That's less money than our unfunded liabilities right now. All these state governments that are run by leftists over years and years, like that in Illinois, or cities like Chicago, Illinois, and Baltimore, their unfunded liabilities are in the trillions too. And that is because they spent way more money than they can afford, promising people who didn't have the market value more than their market value was worth as far as their benefits and their retirements and pensions go. So, you know, if you take that $30 trillion away from the people who reinvest that money and who build jobs and factories, first of all, it's going to retard all growth. But second of all, that's not going to cover our basic debt. So, you know, you might live high on the hog for a couple of years, being able to fund a few programs. But after that, we're starting off from zero. We have nothing left. And like I said, just like with every system that has tried socialism and communism, you know, it's worked for a little while, and then things start falling apart. And then you have austerity, and then after austerity, you have stuff like what's happening in Venezuela right now. And in Venezuela, you know, they've nationalized everything they can. There's nothing left. And they can't even find bread. They have an oil-rich country, and they can't pump oil and sell oil enough to support their spending. So, you know, nice try, dude. Out.